All right, so we'll get started. Thank you very much for that introduction and for having me today. There's nothing I like better than to talk about birds, so always up for this. And we're going to talk today about falling in love with Louisiana birds. It's not hard to do. So the reason that we're doing this is that we were inspired, as she said, by the 200th anniversary of John James Audubon's arrival to Louisiana in 1821. It is said, if you read in the biographical information about Audubon, that he loved Louisiana so much that he even claimed to be from Louisiana, even though we know that that is not true. And you can imagine the abundance of bird life that was around in Louisiana at the time that he arrived 200 years ago. He basically fell head over heels in love with what he saw, and how could he not? He was already an artist prior to coming to Louisiana, but it was here that he basically started from scratch and decided that he needed to take a whole new approach to his art. He wanted his depictions to be three-dimensional, lifelike, not only life-size, but he wanted them to be in lifelike poses with local plants and animals around him, around them. Um, and Audubon created 167 of the 435 images um, for his phenomenal work, The Birds of America, during the 16 years that he was in Louisiana between 1821 and 1837. He fell in love with the birds, and how could he not? These are just a few of the birds that you'll find in Louisiana. They come in all different shapes and sizes and descriptions. And remarkable as it may seem, all the birds that you see here on the screen can actually be found in East Baton Rouge Parish. You don't have to go anywhere to see amazing, beautiful, exotic looking birds. You don't have to travel very far at all. So why is Louisiana so rich in bird life? One of the reasons is that we have a wide variety of habitats. We have our, of course, famous cypress and tupelo swamps. A swamp is defined as a forest that is basically permanently flooded, dominated by our state tree, the bald cypress, as well as tupelo gum. And it may be comprised of other vegetation, swamp maples and willows, and other types of plants that can handle that seasonal flooding. In a swamp, you might find this guy hunting for his favorite food, which is also one of our favorite foods. This is the barred owl hunting for a crawfish. In a marsh, we have different types of marsh in Louisiana. Down near the coast, you might have a salt marsh. A little farther inland, you'll have brackish, which is basically fresh water with some salinity intrusion. And then farther inland, a freshwater marsh. And marshes are often comprised of low-growing plants, very muddy, or possibly floating plants. And this wonderful bird, the purple gallinule, is perfectly suited to our marshes, as it has these wonderful, huge yellow feet that it can use to walk right on top of the floating vegetation. So swamps and marshes are considered wetlands, but we also have a large number of acreage in Louisiana dedicated to working wetlands. These might be rice and crawfish fields that are managed for those products, as well as for waterfowl in the wintertime. And this video was taken on a very steamy, humid summer morning at Sherburne Wildlife Management Area, just 30 minutes from Baton Rouge, where they were drawing down the crawfish ponds, and the lowering water was trapping the fish in the pools, and there were hundreds or thousands of wading birds of every description out there taking advantage of the bounty. So quite amazing. The next layer up from a swamp or a marsh might be the bottomland hardwood forest. So you might have some cypress and tupelo here as well, but then you get into plants like the palmettos, maples, oaks, and other things. And in this bottomland hardwood forest, you'll find this little guy, this golden swamp canary, or some people call it a yellow pop. This is the prothonotary warbler, which is a common resident of the bottomland hardwood forests. He's migratory. He spends the winter in Colombia, South America, and then returns to Louisiana for breeding every spring and stays through the summer. The next layer up, we're going to have the upland hardwood forests. Around in the Baton Rouge area, this might be a beech and magnolia forest. And one of the birds that you might find in this type of habitat, which is a little bit drier, is the black and white warbler, who creeps along the tree branches and trunks seeking out insects. This is one of my students' favorite warblers because it's easy to identify, being only black and white striped. And then we have field edges and forest edges, so edges of agricultural fields, edges of forests where it can get lots of tangles and brambles and lots of weeds that produce lots of seeds. People ask me where they can find painted buntings and indigo buntings, and that's exactly where they hang out. Both of these beautiful birds breed in Louisiana. They also return in the spring and stay for the entire summer. And if you travel along the edges of fields, it's one of the places that you can find these beautiful birds or be able to hear them. The painted bunting has a wonderful song. We also have pine forests. So we have two types. We have the planted pine plantations, which are managed for timber or lumber. And then we also have the longleaf pine savannas. The longleaf pine used to cover most of the Florida parishes, other places in Louisiana. They were a significant part of our state habitat, but now they are limited to very tiny areas, and they're a special and very specific and fragile ecosystem. The pine warbler, the little yellow one that you see here, can be seen in either type of pine forest, but the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker is a specialist of this longleaf pine savanna and can only be found in that type of habitat. We do have some beaches, so we're not up there with Florida as far as our sandy beaches, but we have a lot of coastline, but not a lot of sandy beaches except for Grand Isle and in Cameron Parish, and a few places in between. So that bird life and that habitat is dominated by shorebirds and seabirds, and of course our state bird, the brown pelican. So the other thing that makes Louisiana so special for bird life is our location along the Mississippi Flyway, straight down the middle of the country, basically. And large birds use the Mississippi River and the Mississippi River Valley as a physical route for migration in the spring and in the fall. And then we get hundreds, millions of songbirds that travel across the Gulf of Mexico up from Central America and South America in the spring and head up to Canada and the boreal forest for breeding. And many of those, millions of those, pass right over Louisiana on their way. And then in the fall, make that return journey down to Central and South America and pass through Louisiana again. What kind of birds might you find here in Louisiana? Well, that's a good question. Of course, they're all great birds. We have over 480 species of birds that have been found within our borders, and this would include year-round residents like your blue jays, your cardinals, your titmice, your chickadees, et cetera, And then we have a whole set of these summer breeding migrants that come from Central or South America, like I just described with the prothonotary warbler. And then there's another set of winter visitors that spend their summers in the Arctic or boreal forest, but only come down to as far as Louisiana in the Gulf South to spend the winter. So we don't have time to go over all 480 species of birds, so I'm just going to feature a few. We are known for our wonderful waterfowl, primarily in the wintertime. We have all sorts of beautiful ducks and geese. In fact, it's where the slogan "Sportsman's Paradise" comes from. At one time, Louisiana supported up to 40% of the nation's waterfowl in the winter. And here we see snow geese flying in an agricultural field in southwest Louisiana. And let me tell you, if you've never stood under 100,000 snow geese as they take off and they're all honking and carrying on, it is quite a spectacular sight. I highly recommend it. We have an abundance of different types of raptors or bird of prey. We have owls and kites and different types of hawks, as well as eagles. So bald eagles are becoming more and more common in South Louisiana and in the Baton Rouge area specifically. I hope that many of you have seen the nest on River Road by Farr Park. This is a photo of it from just a couple of weeks ago. The chicks are the dark bird. They're as big as the adults, and they were practicing their flying, exercising their flight muscles at this point and getting ready to leave the nest. They probably have left by now. Our eagles start nesting in September and October and then head up to Canada for the summer, where it's a little bit cooler. So this pair of eagles has nested here for 7 years and fledged 2 chicks this year. We have all the wading birds that you would ever want in Louisiana. And one of the reasons is that we have so much water, and that's what these guys prefer for hunting and living in. One of the best ones, in my opinion, is this wonderful Dr. Seuss bird, the roseate spoonbill, with its hot pink, light pink, orange, and green. Looks like it's wearing a pair of headphones and got a bill like a spoon. The most ridiculous bird ever. The very first one that I ever saw was actually on campus at LSU. So they're definitely in and around the Baton Rouge area, and they nest in different places across the state. If you head down to the coast, you're going to find a variety of shorebirds of all different sizes and descriptions. I do remember when I first started birding, I went to the beach thinking that all those little birds that were running around on the sand were all sandpipers. And by the time I left and I'd worked through my identification and my brand new field guide, I'd figured out that none of them were sandpipers. So that was quite an education. We have great woodpeckers, red-headed, red-bellied, the downy woodpecker, yellow-bellied sapsucker. I already mentioned the endangered red-cockaded woodpecker. And we have the pileated woodpecker, which is the largest North American woodpecker. At 17 inches, he's the size of a crow. And you can see him pecking, and then see his tongue working on this wood. He's actually picking up ants with his tongue. It's interesting, a woodpecker's tongue is so long that it doesn't fit in their mouth and has to wrap all the way around inside of their skull. So they're not only making these holes, but they're slurping up the insects inside with that long tongue. Hummingbirds are a perpetual favorite of just about everybody. Our ruby-throated hummingbirds arrive in March. They set up their nesting almost right away and may have 2 or even 3 nests through the breeding season. And then they start migrating back to Central America in August and September, with the peak being mid-September. And there are places around Baton Rouge, up in St. Francisville particularly, where you can go and see hundreds of hummingbirds in some people's yards, who must be on the ruby-throated hummingbird superhighway. It's just phenomenal. This is our ruby-throated hummingbird. The male, of course, has the red throat, and the female is just green on the back and white on the front. But these are not our only hummingbirds. These are our only summer hummingbirds, but in the wintertime, we have a whole slew of other hummingbirds. So as many as a dozen different species, including this buff-bellied hummingbird, which you would not mistake this for a ruby-throated hummingbird. Not only does he have the buff belly and he has a red bill, but you'll see here that acid green and turquoise gorget and cinnamon tail. He's also almost twice as big as a ruby-throated hummingbird. So be sure to leave your feeders up through the winter and keep them clean, and you may have different hummingbirds at your feeders in your yard. Purple martins are a favorite of a lot of people because they can count on them coming back year after year and using the apartment buildings that they really love. They are one of our earliest migrants and return every year in January after having traveled as much as 3,000 to 5,000 miles from South America one way. This little bird that weighs only an ounce or a little over an ounce flies 3,000 to 5,000 miles one way during migration. They spend the day flying around eating insects, maybe not as many mosquitoes as people think, since mosquitoes tend to be nocturnal, but they certainly make a dent in the insect population. Bluebirds are a perpetual favorite. They will take readily to a man-made nesting box. You can find specifications for how to build those boxes, and they will probably move right in if you have the right kind of habitat. They like to be on the edges of forests generally, although I have some nesting in my yard here in basically a suburban neighborhood in Ponchatoula. So our bluebirds in Louisiana may raise 2 or even 3 broods in a breeding year. If you have house sparrows around, you might want to think about putting up a bluebird box, because house sparrows will try to take over that box and they are not very nice about it. And you can be kind to your bluebirds by feeding them, offering them mealworms. They will just love that. We have a whole slew of wonderful songbirds here, colorful, amazing songbirds, many of which are migratory, and a lot of them are returning to Louisiana right now. I saw a lot of these this weekend in Cameron Parish. So we have indigo buntings, painted buntings, scarlet tanagers, summer tanagers, rose-breasted grosbeaks, blue grosbeaks. It just goes on and on. And then we have warblers. We've had over 30 species of warblers within our borders. They are the flying jewels of our bird world, small, colorful, insect-eating birds that often have a sweet, sweet song. This in particular is the Cape May warbler, a very handsome individual. We don't generally get too many of these in Louisiana, and they cause quite a stir when they show up. Warblers are actually fairly common, but you may have never been aware or have even seen them because they're often, they're only about 4 to 5 inches long for one thing, and they're usually way up in the canopy of the trees looking for insects. So these are not a type of bird that are going to come to your feeders. A couple might come to a suet feeder, but generally they're not going to come to your feeders. They might come to a water feature, for example. Warblers are generally migratory, so many of them spend the winter in Central and South America and then breed all the way up north in the boreal forests of Canada. Some change plumage so drastically they look completely different in the fall and the summer. So a few of our winter warblers include the yellow-rumped, orange-crowned pine, and Wilson's warbler. And then our summer warblers include all of these that you see on the screen here. And most of these are, as I said, migratory that return in March and April and spend the summer with us. All of these little colorful jewels we'll see only during migration. This is a set that's going to pass through Louisiana on their way to places farther north or as far as Canada. But this is the time of year to see them. For the next couple of weeks, this is when they'll be passing through Louisiana. So are you intrigued yet? Are you excited about this? So let's talk about how to find these wonderful birds. I'll give you a couple of tools. I want you all to memorize this website, birdlouisiana.org. This is your one-stop shop for everything related to birding in Louisiana. And basically, it includes links to all the clubs and organizations related to birding, any events and festivals. You can find out where to go birding in Louisiana through links here. You can find out who's offering guided field trips, what organizations might have programs or workshops or classes that you can take advantage of. And then if you ever just have a bird question about bird identification, or what to do about a baby bird or an injured bird, this is the place where you can ask those questions. One of the links on birdlouisiana.org is a link to find the Birder's Guide to Louisiana. This publication was published in a partnership with the Office of State Travel, and they actually offer a free PDF download of this whole book at the website atchafalaya.org, or you can buy a print copy. And a bird finding guide is exactly what it sounds like. So basically, it's a book that is broken out into regions of the state, and within each region, different locations for finding birds are identified. For each of those locations, you'll find a description with a map and turn-by-turn directions of how to get to this location, and it will even tell you which birds you can find at this location in the different seasons of the year. So immensely helpful to birders. One place to start looking for one place to start looking for birds is right outside in your yard. You can put up water features, which will actually bring in more birds or a more diverse list of birds than feeders, or you can offer feeders. You might try black oil sunflower seed as a one type of seed that most birds like, a large variety of birds like, instead of the cheap seed that they tend to pick through and throw on the ground. Many birds love peanuts if you can control or tolerate the squirrels, which can be a problem. You can offer thistle for the goldfinches, but in the Baton Rouge area, really only in January and February. And then, of course, you can put out hummingbird feeders and make your own hummingbird nectar with a quarter cup of sugar to a cup of water. Just melt it in the hot water. You don't have to boil or sterilize anything, but your feeder should be kept very clean. And you don't have to use red dye. Mother Nature does not use red dye, and so we don't need to either. Our feeders generally have red on them, which is enough to attract the hummingbirds. An even better solution or idea for inviting birds to your yards is gardening with native plants. So our native birds need native insects to survive, and those native insects need our native plants. So many of the plants that we use in our yards and gardens are not even from this continent. So they're not very functional in our ecosystem. I've lived in this house in Ponchatoula now for a little over 4 years, and I've kept a list of all the birds that I've seen here, over 100 species so far. And almost half of them I've seen in the trees and the shrubs looking for insects rather than at the feeders or the water features. Another way to find birds is to participate in guided field bird walks, field trips. I tell my classes the best way to learn this is at the elbow of somebody that knows more than you do. So Baton Rouge Audubon offers monthly bird walks at the Bluebonnet Swamp Nature Center on the first Saturday of every month at 7 a.m. You need to bring your own binoculars. And then the Wild Birds Unlimited store on Perkins Road also offers guided walks once a month, and they generally announce those via email. So you can put yourself on their email list, and they'll let you know when they're going to offer those trips. Facebook is a great way to find out what birds are being seen and where. So there's a Facebook group, a public group called Louisiana Birds. That's very active, and people post beautiful beautiful photos of the birds that they're seeing and tell where they're being seen, and there may be a place that you can go visit. And of course, Baton Rouge Audubon Society has a page. The Louisiana Ornithological Society also is very focused on education for birders and has a great discussion group. And then I also created a group specifically on the interaction between plants and birds in Louisiana because I think it's really important to emphasize that. You can find birding friends by joining the Audubon Society. So I've already described a couple of the benefits of becoming an Audubon member with our regular field trips. We also do monthly programs that are of interest to birders, and we have a quarterly newsletter. And I offer birding classes for beginning birders twice a year in the spring and in the fall. So what tools are you going to need in order to pursue this hobby now that you're intrigued and excited about it? You will need some binoculars. We have people that show up for those bird walks without binoculars and they say, oh, I'm fine, but you're not going to have the same experience as you will with binoculars. So if you look at this picture on the left, technically you can see that there's a bird in this photo, but you can't see the color, you can't see any of the field marks. The whole idea of using binoculars is to bring the bird closer to you without disrupting the life of the bird, the activity, and so you can just observe from afar. So as far as recommendations, the best overall birding binocular is an 8x42 binocular, and the 8x is the 8 times magnification, so you're bringing the birds 8 times closer to you. The 42 millimeter is the size of the objective lens, which is the lens that lets the light in. And that size of a binocular allows enough light that you'll get good color and view through the binocular. My best advice, as far as general advice, is to buy a pair with a lifetime warranty. It protects your investment. And quite honestly, if the manufacturer thinks enough of its product to offer a lifetime warranty, then you're probably going to get a good value. The minimum that you might expect to pay would be about $80 for binoculars that have a lifetime warranty. And you can spend up to thousands of dollars if you want on amazing optics. So you just find the price point that works best for you. There are so many brands out there, but here are a couple that I do recommend. Vortex has excellent customer service. Athlon offers a good value binocular with a lifetime warranty for a low price point. And then Nikon is a standard in the optics field, and it also offers binoculars at different price points. As far as where to buy, the Wild Birds Unlimited store that I mentioned earlier on Perkins Road offers birding binoculars, and they will match online pricing. And the nice thing about that is that you can go in and actually try the binocular out and see how it feels in your hand and how it would work for you. And it's nice to be able to do that. Sporting goods stores offer binoculars as well. They may not have as much advice specific to birding, but they certainly offer optics. And then of course you can always find things online. You also need a field guide. The book is what you're going to use to identify these wonderful birds that you're seeing. All the good field guides are arranged by bird families and not by color. If you think about it, a lot of female birds are brown, so you're going to have this whole huge section of brown birds that you're going to have to page through to identify. But if they're arranged by family, and you get to know the families of those birds, then you'll be able to get that identification process down a little bit easier. So a typical field guide will contain either a photo or a painting of the bird, some description, It'll have a range map, which also shows you the seasonal abundance of the bird, which is very important because it tells you when the bird is actually in Louisiana. And then it may give you tips for identification. And they're available at all your major bookstores and internet. You can even find copies on used bookstores for very reasonable prices. The Kaufman Guide to Birds of North America is one that I use for my classes, and it's one of my favorites for new birders because of this wonderful pictorial table of contents. This arrangement by families actually helps to clue you in as to where the bird might fall in the book, so you can get to it a little easier. It's a great help for new birders. And of course, for field guides, we also have new electronic options. There are many apps out there that have all the same information that's in your printed guide. They also include sound, which is wonderful because that can help you learn the songs of birds and learn to bird by ear, which is something that a lot of us love to do. So I don't recommend an app as a replacement for the book, though, because there's something about having that physical book and being able to page through it and look at the birds that's very helpful. But the features that are available in the apps and being able to go specifically to a bird and look up that information quickly is a boon too. So I think they complement each other. There is one app that I would strongly recommend for new birders, and that is the Merlin app by Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It comes in both the iPhone and the Android flavors, and it helps with identification. So even if you can use a photo to identify the bird, and Merlin will, depending on how good the photo is, Merlin will try to identify the bird from the photo. But even if you don't have a picture, you can go through a set of questions inside the Merlin app. What size was the bird? What colors? What was the bird doing? And it'll make suggestions based on your location and the time of year about what bird you might be seeing. And this can be very helpful for bird identification. So in summary, it turns out old J.J. Audubon knew what he was talking about. Louisiana has great, great birds. You may see a wide variety of birds right there in your yard. There's many, many places around the state to see wonderful birds. Please recommend the website, birdlouisiana.org, and tell your friends about that as well. You know that you're going to need a good pair of binoculars. You know you're going to need a field guide, and once you get both of those, you can get outside and find some birds. And with that, I will open it up to some questions.
Oh, Jane, that was a wonderful presentation. Oh my gosh, I had no idea we had that many. I knew we had a lot. I knew we were in the Flyway, but oh my goodness, that's a lot of birds. So how did you get started in birding, as they say?
Well, I'm a relative late comer compared to some of the people that I know that started, when they were 6 and 7 years old. I started about 15 years ago. I was a gardener before I was a birder. So, and I had started a blog sharing my garden. This was pre-Facebook, and I noticed the sparrows at my feeder in my garden had red heads. And I said, well, that's not right. What are these? And I had to figure out what bird that was. And I figured out they were house finches. And they, according to the book that I had, which was 30 years old, they were rare birds. And then I found out that they weren't rare birds. And I just went down this path and said, well, if I've got these birds in my yard, then what else might I have? So I got a pair of binoculars and I got a field guide and started paying attention, started looking around, and just amazed that there were so many birds living in and among us that I had just not paid any attention to. And I really went off the deep end and wanted to start sharing my enthusiasm almost immediately. So.
Oh, that is wonderful. Well, I don't know about anybody else, but whenever the white pelicans come through in their seasonal fly, down south and on the way. It's like old friends have come back, you know, you look forward to it. It's a certain time of year that's going to happen. We do have a question from somebody who wants to know, can you tell us why, blah, blah, blah. Can you tell us more about why birds are dying from local feeders and what we can do about it?
So there were some cases this winter. We had an abundance of finches this year. So we normally have goldfinches in the wintertime in the Baton Rouge area. But this year we had more goldfinches than normal, and we had a very large number of pine siskins, which are closely related to goldfinches, and purple finches. So basically, this is what was called an eruption year, where these finches that normally stay a little bit farther north actually came farther down into the Gulf South than they normally do. And these finches appeared to be infected with salmonella or another infectious disease. And because they were piling up at the feeders in very close proximity, they were making each other sick. So I think the verdict is still out. A lot of people were saying that it was salmonella, but then we had a couple of authority folks say that this was not actually salmonella, and they weren't sure what it was. But the best approach is to basically, when you see sick birds around your feeders, is to stop feeding for a while, clean all of your feeders, and wait a couple of weeks before you put those feeders back out.
Well, and then we have another question about how to encourage bluebirds and nicely discourage sparrows.
There is no way to do that, unfortunately. House sparrows are very, very persistent, and if they live in and around your yard, they're going to decide that that's where they want to be, and that birdhouse is good for them, and they can be pretty mean to those bluebirds. So there is, so on that birdlouisiana.org website that I mentioned, there's a link to the Bluebird Society of Louisiana, and basically any question that you have about bluebirds can be answered by somebody by that website or somebody on that website. So I had a problem last year with bluebirds that caused harm to house sparrows that caused harm to my baby bluebirds. So I added a sparrow spooker to my my bluebird house this year, and it's this contraption that basically hangs strips of shiny mylar that the house sparrows are supposed to not like, but the bluebirds don't mind. And it seems to be working so far. I took a picture of my bluebirds this morning, and the babies are nearly ready to fledge. So I've got all my fingers crossed that the sparrow spooker is working.
Oh, that's a terrific idea. Well, if we don't have any more questions, I just want to thank Jane Patterson again for her time and her fabulous photos. Those were wonderful. Please do go check out the braudubon.org website. And I also want to mention again that the, the Associated Women in the Arts art show that we have on display right now at the Old State Capitol. It'll be up until June. And we have one other bird-related activity going on with the show. We are sponsoring a bird walk in downtown Baton Rouge at 8 o'clock on Saturday, May the 8th. And you need to go to our website to register for that. It's limited participation. We have to keep the group kind of small, but I think that's going to be a lot of fun, especially for any of us who've not done this before. So it was just great to have everybody on the call. And unless somebody else has another question, I
do see one other question about binoculars.
I didn't see it. I'm sorry.
Kathleen asked about a good pair of light binoculars. So I guess probably need to look to see what kind of binoculars you're using. I know the first pair that I bought, I made every mistake that you can make and got these huge binoculars that are very heavy with this skinny little strap that hurt my neck. So the first thing is to make sure that you have a good strap, or they make these harnesses that you can use that distributes the weight of the binocular so that it's not so heavy on your neck. But I would say when you're looking for binoculars, just look at the relative weight, but know too that a quality binocular is going to be made of glass and not made of plastic, so it's going to have some weight to it. But they do vary in weight, and you may be able to find something that's comfortable for you. But the harness does help a lot of people. So
Excellent. I'm sorry I missed that. I didn't.
that's
Somehow I skipped over that.
I don't see any other questions. And people
Right.
can always contact me through the Audubon Society if you ever have another question.
And she has a great email address. It's cjanebird. It's a terrific email address. Thank you all for participating, and please come visit us at the Old State Capitol.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
Night,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.